Representative Willis, thank you for making your presentation today. I have a little bit different recollection of how this all kind of unfolded. So with your indulgence, I'd like to kind of go through what my recollection of the process in this was. So help me with, I think everyone knows, but maybe for those who are not here, what started, what was there there was an action or a tragedy here in the state that kind of started this conversation. Could you remind us what that was?
Well, actually, this was originally started from the report that came out from Johns Hopkins Institute on some ways that we could clean up our FOID card. It got brought to the head and probably put into a much more urgent issue as a result of the Henry Pratt shooting in Aurora.
In Aurora. So that's what I remember, is that there was an investigation done after the Aurora shooting, after the tragedy there, and there were some deficiencies found in some of what transpired in the time that that shooter applied for the ability to get a concealed carry license and all of that. And I have the timeline for that if we need to go through it. But just remembering that, I know that you wanted to put a working group together. And my recollection was that Leader Durkin then asked several of the members from our side of the aisle to be a part of that working group. And there were 4 members. So in putting the working group together at our first meeting, we had some legislators, some legislative staff, from both sides of the aisle. We had some gun rights advocates. As I recall, there was one advocate that wanted to be there that was excluded. There were some representatives on the phone from GPAC and maybe another organization. And we had some law enforcement members there from the state and some local level, including Aurora. At that time, you presented a list of 12 items that I believe that were put together. They were some GPAC requests, and in that meeting, we looked at those, and one of the main issues on that list was fingerprinting. I think you may remember or recall that during that meeting, we gave a pretty strong objection to the idea of fingerprinting otherwise law-abiding citizens for exercising a Second Amendment right, and even said that that particular point could be a non-starter for us, and if that was what this was all about, we probably weren't going to be able to go any further with our conversations. Do you recall that?
I do, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. So as we reviewed the list, we were then kind of tasked with trying to decide of those points which ones maybe we could find some common ground on, and we scheduled this at least the idea of having ongoing meetings. And then we had a second meeting. I want to say at that first meeting, I believe that you assured me that there was that the impetus of this was not ultimately to make sure that we got fingerprinting for those otherwise law-abiding citizens who had done nothing else wrong except want to exercise their Second Amendment right.
Well, I think what I probably assured you was that was not the only reason to be behind this, that we were looking at the FOID card revocation issuance as a whole. What I think came out of that meeting, just as your group stated that fingerprinting was a non-negotiable, it came from the other side that they felt very strongly that fingerprinting needed to be part of the package as we continued on.
Okay, but at that point we were still talking.
We were,
and arranged to have a second meeting. At the second meeting, I recall we had legislators there, law enforcement, and some staff, and the gun rights advocates were not there, and neither were the those in opposition for, or those who were supporting the GPAC 12-pointer. That's right?
We had some
Okay.
smaller meetings as we went forward.
Yeah,
yes,
because it
mostly
became
with
evident at that meeting
legislators.
that there had been
Excuse
some
me,
other meetings.
Representative Bryant, your time has expired, but your seatmate has sought recognition. I'm wondering if Representative Severin is seeking to yield time to you.
Absolutely, thank you.
All right, 5 more minutes for Representative Bryant.
Thank you. So we had a second meeting. In that second meeting, the 12 points again were kind of brought forward, and we did talk about the possibility of, I believe we talked about the possibility of perhaps offering up fingerprinting, provided that that was an option similar to CCL, where it would maybe just speed up the processing. But the conversations were ongoing, and I left there kind of feeling like we were in a good place. Did you feel like that at the end of the second meeting?
I do. I think
Okay.
that we continue to have open communication through the entire process, ma'am.
Thank you. So I left the meeting then thinking that we were going to have another meeting, and then within about 24 hours, House Bill 96 was filed, which ultimately had, if not all, at least the majority of those 12 points that we had discussed in bill form. You and I had a telephone conversation about that, and you indicated that you did not intend to move that bill forward, that we were going to go ahead and have continuing conversations.
I did.
Is that accurate?
I reached out and made a phone call to you directly to make sure that you knew that I did not intend to have our conversation stopped at that time.
Okay, so let's talk about what was in House Bill 96, even though that is not the bill we're looking at today, but there are still major elements in today's bill that are a part of that. You've amended it, and so we'll talk about those amendments as well. So House Bill 96 and those elements that still remain would have been an increase in the FOID card. That particular bill was taking FOID from $10 for 10 years to 100. So I'm going to use 10 years as the comparison, so we're comparing apples to apples. So it would be from now $10 to $100 over 10 years, which is a 1,000% increase. The bill that we're seeing today has been amended, so that is now $20 for 5 years, which is $40 per 10 years. So we're still talking about a 400% increase as compared to what someone is paying today for a FOID card. Is that right?
Well, ma'am, what I would bring out to your attention, if we adjusted for inflation when the $10 was put in originally in the 70s, or $5 where it went, in 1968, and now with inflation going through, current inflation would say that today's card would be $38.
So, okay, so you agree that it's a 400% increase.
Well, math doesn't lie. I
Okay.
can't argue
Okay.
with you on that.
So 400% increase. Just curious, do we have any other constitutionally, a constitutional right for which we charge? And if we do, have we
Well,
had a 400% increase on that particular Second Amendment, or on that particular constitutional right?
I would say if you want to consider the right to leave our country, a cost of a passport is in there, and the current cost
Passport's
of
a constitutional right?
Well, right to free travel, if you want to consider that. I mean, it's not necessarily written in
which
the
amendment?
Constitution.
What could you? I'm not familiar with that constitutional amendment. What number is that?
It's not necessarily in an amendment, but I would say the right to travel certainly would go under right to move around or whatever, so that you're not held captive. If you want to go that
All
way.
right, I'll get with your staff later and find out which constitutional amendment says I can travel.
Okay.
Okay. So, all right. So going on then. We also were moving the timeline from 10 years to 5. In our conversations with the state police, do you remember them saying that one of their major objections was going from 10 years to 5? Because the reason we moved it from 5 to 10 was because they were having trouble processing them at the 5. They didn't have the staff to do it, and they specifically said, can we not change it to 5 years? And so I'm wondering what led to changing this then over their objections.
Well, I think that they realized that it would be much more efficient to do it that way. And at this point, the state police are totally on board with the 5-year time on it. It makes it consistent with concealed carry licenses.
So in my conversations with them, the conversations were mostly that they need money and they don't really care because they need the money. So they're looking to get the infusion of money here. So let's be clear about that.
Representative Bryant, your time has expired, but Representative Marin is seeking recognition. Do you wish to yield your time to Representative Bryant?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to yield my 5 minutes to Representative Bryant.
Okay, 5 more minutes, Representative Bryant.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to the cost of this again. So in the in House Bill 96, the original legislation, we also have in this legislation, so this is the same, we have an issue of a background check and fingerprinting. However, in this bill, you made clear in your amendments that you are limiting the amount of cost that the vendor that is taking the fingerprints can charge. So with that being said, so we're actually at an expense, even with those changes, we're back up to a minimum expense over the 10 years of roughly $100. So we're going from 10 back to 100, which takes us to 1,000% increase again on the cost of an otherwise law-abiding citizen exercising their Second Amendment right guaranteed by the Constitution.
Well, the one thing you're not putting into consideration, the fingerprinting is a one-time charge. Not every person will need to get fingerprinted if they already have their fingerprints on file from a concealed carry license. They will not need to redo those fingerprints. So fingerprinting is a one-time charge. So I don't think that really works quite right in your figures.
So currently, do you know how many percentage of current FOID card holders have their fingerprints on file?
Not off the top of my head.
Well, let me help you then.
I'm sure we can get that for you.
It's roughly 0.06% of FOID card holders. So basically everyone, right, almost everyone, except for the 0.06% who have theirs on file right now will have to be fingerprinted?
I'm sorry, ma'am, I missed your question.
It's not really a question. I'm just saying that there's 0.06% of present FOID card holders have their fingerprints on file. So basically, almost everyone who presently has a FOID card right now is going to have to be fingerprinted. So let's talk about fingerprinting for just a second. In committee, a question was asked about fingerprinting. And the question was if you supported universal fingerprinting. Do you remember what your answer was to that?
I said if it makes it a safer state, I am in support of anything that makes our state safer.
Okay, so I just want to make sure the body is listening right now. Make sure the body is listening right now. So, all due respect to my colleague on the other side of the aisle, the statement was that she's okay with universal fingerprinting. Okay with universal fingerprinting. Every citizen of this state, it would be okay to fingerprint them. Otherwise, legal citizens doing nothing illegal, but it would be okay to fingerprint them. So just let that sink in for just a little bit. Okay, going on. So we know that there were some deficiencies identified after the investigation from the tragedy in Aurora. I think every gun owner in this state wants to make sure that we are doing it legally and that we're keeping our citizens safe. The whole objective is to get the bad guys off the street and the ones who who don't have a legal right to own them. We want to make sure that they no longer can do that. So I don't know if you're aware that Representative Wheeler, are you aware that Representative Wheeler has filed a bill that kind of goes at this from from the backside to address the issues that were identified in Aurora? That's House Bill 3839. Are you aware of that?
I am aware of his bill, ma'am.
Okay. And in his case, do you, or in that bill's case, do you know what the status of that bill is?
I believe it's in rules.
In the Senate? It's in rules?
I honestly don't know, ma'am.
Okay. But we do have a bill.
Okay, so it's in assignments in the Senate then.
Okay. So we actually do have a bill that is that is current and that we could actually pass in this legislative session that does address the issues that we found from the tragedy in Aurora without infringing on our citizens' Second Amendment rights.
Well, with all due respect to the representative that filed the bill, I do believe there are some major deficiencies in that bill that did not address many of the concerns that were brought up from the Joyce Foundation when they did a study of FOID card holders.
Oh,
Representative Bryant, your time is drawn to a close again. Representative Demmer wishes to yield his 5 minutes to you.
thank you.
Not to mention, there is no funding in his bill to actually be able to do the things that he feels are necessary.
Okay, so but we still have time to take the real issues and we could work on some funding mechanisms. So I just want to make sure everyone understands that this isn't the end all to beat all right here today.
That bill is currently in the Senate. I have no control on when that bill will move from the Senate over to the House.
If it did, if they were working on that in the Senate and it moved over to the House, would that be something that you think you could support?
I would certainly look at the bill much closer and try to be able to support it if I could.
Okay, let me just move on then, really quickly. In our conversations and in committee, it was stated that immediately, if this bill passes, immediately it will be litigated. We know. Do you know that there is an outstanding litigation right now that's going to be going to the Supreme Court that actually may wipe out the FOID card in Illinois totally? And should that happen, basically the work on this bill will totally go away. But in fact, the bill that Representative Wheeler has actually would stand up to constitutional scrutiny. And I just want to make sure that the body here knows that today. I'm not going to take too much more time with this bill because I think there are some other speakers that are going to speak on this as well. I just want to highlight a couple to the bill. There's a couple things I want to highlight I think will also be brought up with some other speakers coming along. This bill does absolutely nothing to address the very real issues identified in the tragedy of Aurora. There has been another study that's mentioned, but the driving force behind this was to fix what happened in Aurora so that we can all get beyond what those problems were. It creates a real question of constitutionality, will absolutely be litigated and struck down, causing a delay in addressing the real issues that have been identified. 3, it divides a constitutionally guaranteed right into 2 categories, those who can afford it and those who cannot afford it. It opens a wide door to requiring fingerprinting to exercise a constitutional right, and by the sponsor's own testimony in committee encourages universal fingerprinting. It redirects valuable dollars, which a point we didn't even get to yet in the amendment, takes money away from IDNR, $2 million a year. So over that 20-year period, $20 million a year from IDNR that is directed to the conservation police that should be used to make sure that our state parks are managed and properly taken care of. It also sets a fee limit for private businesses, creates an unenforceable requirement for local law enforcement to confiscate private property, and also allows for them to enter private homes. This is a bad bill. The attempt at this from the beginning was applaudable. We can probably get to a place where even members like like me, who usually oppose almost all of these, I think we could get to a place where we can find common ground. I would like to work on the bill that Representative Wheeler has presented. We can do it over on the Senate side with our friends and allies over there and bring it over here. But this is not the bill. Friends, I urge a no vote today to protect the constitutional rights of our citizens in this state and to ensure that when the Supreme Court rules that the FOID card in Illinois is not constitutional and wipes it out, we don't waste this valuable time addressing the issues that have been identified in the tragedy that happened in Aurora. I urge a no vote.